Children arrive at Camp Walden for an 8-week all-girls summer camp. They're thrilled to camp by Moose Lake. Meet Hallie Parker, an 11-year-old from Northern California, and Annie, an 11-year-old from London. They look identical but have contrasting personalities. The two girls engage in a fencing match, showcasing their exceptional fencing skills. Annie wins but accidentally pushes Hallie into the water. They discover their uncanny resemblance. Hallie insults Annie, and they nearly come to blows. The camp counselor intervenes. Later, they argue over a poker game, and Hallie proposes a dare. The loser has to jump naked into Moose Lake. Annie loses and fulfills the dare, but Hallie's friends steal her clothes. Annie vows revenge, leading to a prank war. It culminates in camp counselors falling into one of Hallie's traps, and the twins are isolated in the isolation cabin as punishment. Their hostility continues. However, they soon become close after Annie helps Hallie close the jammed window. They tell each other about their homes and families. Annie hasn't had a dad in her life since her dad and mother got divorced when she was little, while Hallie doesn't have a mother and she lives with her dad. After learning that the two also share the same birthday, Annie starts suspecting that all of this can't be mere coincidences. Annie and Hallie then show each other the only pictures of their father and mother they have respectively. It turns out each has half of a torn wedding photograph of their parents. They realize Annie and Hallie are actual twin sisters. They are elated by the discovery. They tape their parents' half-torn picture back together and spend hours together, learning about their mother and father. As the end of the summer camp approaches, they long to know more about their parents, so Hallie then proposes an idea. She suggests they switch places and go back home as one another. Annie tells her that they will immediately get caught, but Hallie insists that they will be able to pull it off as they both look identical and they can learn how to imitate each other. Hallie goes back to London as Annie. She perfectly impersonates Annie, effortlessly imitating Annie's handshake and mannerisms so much. Meanwhile, Hallie is elated to meet her mother and maternal grandfather, Charles, for the first time. She hugs them tightly, which surprises Elizabeth. She tags along with Elizabeth to her work to spend more time with her. At an opportune time, Hallie broaches the topic of her father Nick. She asks Elizabeth if she remembers him and how they met. Elizabeth shares the story of how she met Nick with Hallie. Nick was a wonderful man, and they met during a voyage on the Queen Elizabeth II, QE2, an ocean liner that sails from London to New York. Flying wasn't their preferred mode of travel, so they chose the ship. Their connection began when they were seated next to each other for dinner on the first night of the voyage. In the meantime, Annie, pretending to be Hallie, embarks on her adventure to California. Meeting her father fills her with joy, and she can hardly believe she's talking to her dad. She excitedly calls him dad in almost every sentence. Annie is welcomed at home by Hallie's kind nanny, Chessie, and their dog, Sammy. While Chessie can't distinguish between Annie and Hallie, Sammy appears to have figured out Annie's impersonation, as he keeps barking at her. Annie's excitement wanes as she learns about Nick's new young fiancée, Meredith Blake. Nick and Meredith seem deeply infatuated with each other. However, Chessie suspects that Meredith's interest in Nick might be driven by his wealth. Annie herself begins to dislike Meredith after witnessing her self-centered behavior. The following day, Nick addresses Annie and asks her how she would feel if Meredith became part of their family. Pretending ignorance, Annie responds with enthusiasm, expressing her desire for a big sister and mentioning that Nick is adopting Meredith. However, her enthusiasm fades when Nick corrects her, revealing his intention to marry Meredith. Forced to face the truth, Annie responds negatively and exclaims in French, a language Hallie doesn't understand. Nick is taken aback by her reaction, but Meredith reassures him that such a response is normal for a child whose father is remarrying. Meredith then attempts to have a conversation with Annie, pretending to empathize, but Annie quickly sees through her insincerity and cuts her off. Annie acknowledges that Meredith is young, beautiful, and attractive to her dad, but she points out that a successful marriage should be based on more than just physical attraction. Meredith's attempts to win over Annie with charm fail miserably, and she drops her pretense. She bluntly informs Annie that she and Nick are getting married in 2 weeks, regardless of Annie's feelings, and she needs to accept it. Distressed by Meredith's manipulation, Annie decides to call Hallie. She shares the news of their father's upcoming wedding and persuades Hallie to bring Elizabeth to California in an attempt to break off the engagement. However, Charles, their grandfather, overhears Hallie on the phone and compels her to confess to her mother immediately. Hallie is frightened but confesses everything to Elizabeth, offering her apologies for the deception. Surprisingly, rather than scolding her daughter, Elizabeth becomes emotional and embraces Hallie. Simultaneously, in California, Chessie also realizes that it's Annie, not Hallie. Soon, the truth becomes apparent to everyone except Nick and Meredith, who remain unaware of the twin switch. Hallie convinces Elizabeth to fly to California to meet Nick, but she keeps her mother in the dark about Nick's engagement, assuring her that Nick is eager to see her again. Despite the passing years, Elizabeth still appears to hold affection for Nick. Nervous about the impending meeting, Elizabeth asks Martin, the family butler, to accompany her and Hallie as a friend. To orchestrate a reunion between Nick and Elizabeth, Hallie, Annie, Chessie, Martin, and Charles collaborate to arrange for them to meet at a hotel in San Francisco. Coincidentally, Nick is scheduled to meet Meredith's parents at the same hotel. Elizabeth coincidentally encounters Nick and Meredith in the hotel elevator. Suspicion arises, prompting her to confront her twin daughters. In response, the girls come clean and disclose that Nick is engaged and set to marry in 2 weeks. Annie pleads with her mother not to allow it, but Elizabeth, hurt by the revelation, insists that she and Nick have grown apart and that he appears happy with his fiancée. Elizabeth firmly declares her intention to return to London with Annie. However, Nick, who is elated to have run into Elizabeth after so many years, frantically searches for her throughout the hotel. When he finally spots her, he accidentally falls into the pool in his excitement. Nick's presence breaks the ice between him and Elizabeth, but just as they begin to reconnect, Annie and Hallie arrive and confess to the twin switch. Although initially taken aback, Nick becomes overjoyed and emotional to see his other daughter after 11 years. Meredith soon discovers the situation to her dismay. Later that evening, the girls prepare a surprise for their parents, a candlelit dinner served by Chessie and Martin on a yacht decorated to recreate their first meeting aboard the Queen Elizabeth II. During the dinner, Nick and Elizabeth reminisce about their past, which included both good and bad times. They reveal that Elizabeth had left Nick after a significant argument when they were both young and had bad tempers. Elizabeth expresses some sadness over Nick not following her when she left, but Nick explains he wasn't sure if she wanted him to. While they make plans for the girls to spend holidays together, they decide against resuming their romantic relationship. Despite their determination, Hallie and Annie are upset but decide not to leave each other. They hatch a plan. The next day, they wear identical dresses to confuse their parents and refuse to disclose which twin is which. They impose a condition that the four of them must go on a camping trip before revealing their true identities. Nick and Elizabeth eventually agree to take the girls on the camping trip, which is the annual outing that Nick and Hallie embark on before the school year begins. Meredith, as expected, is unhappy about the trip and insists on joining. Despite Nick's hesitation, Elizabeth invites Meredith to accompany them on the camping trip while she stays behind at the Parker residence. The group sets off and starts hiking. Meredith quickly struggles with the altitude, growing tired. The girls take advantage of her discomfort and play various tricks on her. They place heavy stones in her backpack and startle her with a lizard. When Meredith stops to rest, the girls offer to help her, but she rudely declines, seeing through their seemingly angelic faces. She threatens to make their lives miserable after marrying their father if they continue to play tricks on her, but the girls persist in pranking her. At night, tired of hiking and dealing with the two sisters, Meredith plants a long kiss on Nick, takes a sleeping pill, and goes to bed early. Later, after Nick has also gone to sleep, Annie and Hallie transport a sleeping Meredith on her inflatable air bed into the lake. Meredith awakens the next morning in the middle of the lake, startled by a bird. Frustrated, she loses her patience and angrily gives Nick an ultimatum to choose between her and his daughters. Nick finally realizes Meredith's negative attitude and acknowledges that his daughters won't be okay with her. Without much deliberation, he chooses the girls over Meredith and ends the engagement. Although Annie and Hallie face consequences for their pranks, they accept them, relieved to be rid of Meredith. Elizabeth apologizes to Nick for inviting Meredith on the trip and disrupting their engagement. Nick humorously suggests that Elizabeth deliberately tricked Meredith into going camping with Hallie and Annie. Later that night, after putting the girls to bed, Nick shares his wine collection with Elizabeth. Among the wines is a 1983 vintage that they had at their wedding. The nostalgic moment becomes emotional, and Elizabeth, on the verge of tears, refrains from kissing Nick, trying to put on a brave face and ignoring her feelings. A hesitant Nick puts the wine back, and later, they all share emotional goodbyes, hugging one another. Elizabeth returns to London with Annie as the rain pours down. Annie is dejected about being separated from her sister and father once more. However, when Annie and Elizabeth arrive home, they find Hallie and Nick waiting for them. Nick and Hallie flew to London on the Concorde, significantly reducing travel time compared to general passenger planes. Nick tells Elizabeth that he made the mistake of not pursuing her once, and he is determined not to repeat that mistake. Elizabeth, though initially fearful of remarrying, eventually yields to Nick's unwavering confidence. Hallie and Annie watch happily as their parents embrace. The story concludes with Nick and Elizabeth getting remarried aboard the QE2, with the girls serving as bridesmaids.